Why did I put that in air quotes? Today I want to share through personal experiences, I guess through personal stories, how I used to view the cool parents as cool as fuck to how my sort of outlook has shifted as I've grown up. I'm 41 now and a parent to an 11-year-old son. So let's get into this. In this video, I'm going to break down how growing up with my parents was a totally different experience than my friends' parents, who I consider the cool parents, what I learned from both sets of parents, and how that's shaped my own parenting style now as I raise my son. So some context really quick would be, if you don't know, I'm a recovering drug addict and alcoholic, 10 years sober. So there's that. And I don't blame the cool parents for any of that. I am responsible for the choices I made. So I just want to be clear from that right off the bat. And this isn't coming from a place of judgment. This is just sharing like what I went through. And I think that it took me almost a decade to learn some of these lessons. So I just want to share that today. So I was raised in a really strict religious household. I would almost describe my mom as an extremist when it comes to religion, specifically the Catholic religion. And growing up, I butted heads with my mom a lot because when I was 14 was actually the time that I drank for the first time, and I also started taking drugs. All the way back then, it was just something as innocent as like prescription pills or smoking weed. But once I started delving into those, my mind was set on like continuing through that way. And my parents had a very strict no drugs policy, no underage drinking, and no cussing, along with like, you need to go to church on Sunday, you need to be home by curfew. These were the main rules that I took issue with. So whenever my best friend came to pick me up from my parents' house, then I could hear the system just getting closer and closer and closer because, you know, the vibrations. And so then when she pulled into the driveway, the house was like vibrating. It was so loud. And so then I knew to run out, hop in the car and go. And my mom would get really angry and, you need to turn that down. You're gonna have permanent ear damage. You're listening to filth. And we were listening to like Trick Daddy, 3 6 Mafia. All these sort of rappers were just what we were really into. We really liked Tech Nine. At the time, he was an underground rapper, Messy Marv too. And then we liked to listen to a lot of that music that wasn't on the radio, and so we would blast it so loud into the neighborhoods as we rolled around and picked up drugs, delivered drugs, etc. And we felt important, and we felt like we were becoming who we were supposed to be, and this was sort of like what we wanted to do with our life. And it bothered my mom so much. I would come home really high and she would say things like, you're never going to amount to anything doing what you're doing. Drugs, partying, drinking, it's a dead end. And she would be yelling this at me, and I'm so high and drunk, I'm just like, whatever, whatever, Mom, I'm not going to quit. I'm not going to stop. And I would think, in my head, she's wrong. She doesn't know because she never did any of these things. And it's true. My mom didn't do drugs. She didn't party. She drank very minimal. So she didn't have experience in this. And so I just chalked it off as like, she just doesn't know and she's missing out and she wants to kill my fun. And my dad, most of the time I butted heads with my mom because my dad was the more passive/funny parent. And he would stand up for me when they would argue about me because I could hear through the walls. And so I sort of favored my dad, and my mom was like my number one enemy and growing up in the house. So, like when you're under the age of 18, you maybe disagree with your parents. Maybe like I wasn't following the curfew rules. I was sneaking out of my window and I was coming back before my parents woke up for work. So I would come back around 6 a.m. in the morning, and that just became regular for me. But I was also the middle child, so I was kind of I knew at a certain point that my parents weren't really looking to see what I was doing. If I said I went to bed, they just took my word that I went to bed. They weren't like coming to check in my room, is she in bed? So because of that, I did tend to get away with a lot more. Now, where was I escaping to? Of course, to go to my friends' houses, my friends' parents' houses, because I viewed my friends' parents as hella cool because they did everything that I appreciated, and we shared a lot in common. So this beginning part is focusing on when I was 18 years old, because once I turned 18, I had the mindset of I can do whatever I want. Like, fuck all of your rules. I'm gonna do what I feel I should do. And I got kicked out at the age of 18 because my parents did try to give me many chances, but what really got them was me deliberately disobeying the rule of not coming home under the influence of drugs and alcohol. So I was coming home so intoxicated that it was probably infuriating, scary, hurtful. I mean, I couldn't imagine how they felt, but I didn't care. I was really immature. I was an asshole too. My parents, they had a strong faith and they had strong beliefs, and they stood by those beliefs. But me, I felt different than everyone in my family, like the black sheep. I was an artist, I was a rebel, I was a free spirit. I wanted to just be out in the world exploring on my own terms, and I didn't want to feel constrained by all these rules that I felt like they were suffocating me. And so, rightfully so, my parents kicked me out, and from that time on, I took a lot of distance from my parents because I chose to overlook all of the good in my parents, so that they had strong beliefs, that they made the effort to work with me on many things. They helped me with more things than I could ever count or even really know. And I chose to judge them, especially my mom, as hypocritical. I chose to focus on her faults and her judgments and her harsh words, and I chose to see that as hypocritical because God wouldn't condemn me for making mistakes. If I am making mistakes, God wouldn't judge me so harshly. And I would sometimes learn, like, I went to Catholic school growing up, so I sort of knew some of these things from the Bible, and I would say, well, what about the plank in your own eye? And I would start these religious debates with her of why I didn't agree with how she was trying to shame me into feeling. I would always say, you're just belittling me. The way you talk to me is disrespectful. But I wasn't seeing my own disrespect, and she couldn't see anything that she was doing wrong. So we were both sort of like on these completely different ends of the spectrum, and we couldn't get along for many years. So we separated. I went on my own, and she would write me letters sometimes. And if she knew where I was staying, sometimes I would call her, but that was really about it. I would visit my nieces and nephews, but yeah, I took a lot of time away from my family. Once I got kicked out, I was on my own out in the world, and I really had no idea what I was in store for. I knew nothing about rent. I knew nothing about homekeeping, domestic life, and nor did I have any interest in it. So I, of course, went over to my friend's house because I viewed their parents as hella cool. They didn't care what we did. I could crash there for an indefinite amount of time as I sort of gained my footing. And during that time, I got to know a lot of my friends' parents, and these are the cool parents in my eyes. So why I spent a lot of time getting to know the cool parents is because this was an age where it was before me and most of my friends had our own places. So there was maybe, by the age of 19, maybe one or two friends were renting an apartment or renting a house, and the one that was renting a house was married, and I was just like, that's the absolute last thing I want to do. So we spent a lot of time at their parents' houses because they were a variety of different professions, but most were like corporate employees, entrepreneurs, some even just criminals, really straight up. But all that they all had in common one thing: they were out of the house for long hours, and they didn't care what we did in the house. They just kind of let us do our own thing, which I viewed as the absolute coolest thing. I was just like, your parents are so cool. They don't care what we do. And even more than not caring what we do, it was like they were allowing us to use their fancy things. And in a way, it was like we were playing grown-ups before we were really grown up. So we're racing around town in these collectible, luxury, fancy, expensive cars that, you know, you drive through and everybody sort of looks at you like you're important, or just like they're looking at the car, but the attention is on the young girls in the car as well as the car. And it felt kind of addictive to get that kind of attention. And on top of that, we spent most of our time picking up and selling drugs, and it wasn't uncommon for a friend's mom or a friend's dad to give us like enough cash to be more than enough to cover pounds of weed or mounds of cocaine. And, hey, will you girls go pick this up? I know that you get better prices than I do just because you're so pretty, sort of things like that. And, or, hey, can you guys go grab this for me because I don't have a connection for this, but this is what I want. And so we were young and we were already doing drugs, so we knew where to get drugs and we knew where to get good stuff for really cheap. And so, like I said, I started when I was 14, but I got heavier and heavier as I got later into my teens. And so picking up and finding drugs was like the easiest thing in the world at that point. And they were older and they didn't always have somebody they knew that they could get it from, but they knew if they give us money, we will come back with more than enough. And then we could have whatever was extra. And then we could also, they would go, it was like in return because we weren't old enough to drink. So they would just pick us up vodka or whatever alcohol we wanted. And it was just this sort of back and forth relationship that we had. And while we didn't always get high and drunk together, it was usually like them doing their own thing and we're like in the back doing our own thing, or in the basement or in the bedroom. But it felt like they were vouching for us, like giving the stamp of approval, you know, like, this is fine. Like, what, I do this, you do this, it's not a problem. And I also thought they were really cool because they overlooked things like arrest and warrants and those like ankle things you have to wear, the house arrest thing. Like, my friend got on house arrest when he was, I think, 20 or 19 or 20, and his dad, he just let all of us come over there and party all the time so that his son would stay there. And he also didn't view like him being on house arrest as a thing. It was just like, it's just a thing. Like, he does this now. Like, he wasn't trying to get him to stop in any way, or he didn't think his son had any kind of problem. Like, it was just, this is what we do now. We come over here and you don't leave, we just come to you. When I say they minimized warrants, what I mean is if I'm over at my boyfriend's house and the police come to the door, which they do sometimes, and they're looking for me or my boyfriend, and we have warrants, which we did almost the entire time we were together, his mom would say, "Oh no, I haven't seen either of them, but if they come by, I'll be sure to give you a call." Like, they would flip to being a normal parent for that interaction with the police, like a concerned parent. Like, "Oh, yeah, I've been looking for them. I've been trying to get a hold of them, but I haven't seen either of them. Who knows? I mean, I'm sure they'll stop by at some point, and I'll let you know. I'll reach out. I'm sure we'll get this figured out. Thanks for stopping by." Meanwhile, we're in our little hideout spots within the house, and then the police leave and we come out. Then she would come back and tell us what they said, and we'd all laugh about it and talk shit about how stupid the police were. and they'll never figure it out. We're too smart, and then just go on about getting high like we always did. And this was before everybody had a recording device, aka a cell phone, on them at all times. A lot of people had cell phones, but they weren't using them in the way they are today, where they're just like secretly recording things. And it was a lot more of the environment was more conducive to secrecy and hiding things than it would be today, with everybody having the ability to very easily record you without even you really realizing they're recording you. So we felt like we could do whatever we wanted. As long as we stuck together, everything would be cool. And because my arrest they escalated. So in the beginning, it was more just like a minor drinking underage, or public intoxication, or possession of marijuana. And these were sort of the early charges. And then as I got a little rough around the edges, a little more mouthy, and had a lot more animosity towards the police, assault on a police officer, I had several of those. DUIs, which are more serious because I could have very easily killed people. And the DUIs I got don't represent all the times I drove drunk. They just represent the very few times I was arrested for driving drunk. So DUI, DWI, driving on suspended, warrants for my arrest because I'm no longer showing up to court, so on and so forth. All the way towards my last several arrests, which were evading the police, fencing stolen property, stolen car. Towards the end, the stolen cars weren't just, I want a car to drive around in. It wasn't like, I just want this nice car to drive around in. It was more like, I want the most discreet car possible, like a Honda Civic, something that's really easy to take, yet at the same time, it's going to just look like everybody else on the road. I'm going to look like a mom as I'm driving this, or a college student, and it's very easy to swap out the plates because they're everywhere. So it would allow us to do things like break into houses, break into businesses, anything to get that merchandise so that we could swap it out for dope. And that's what fencing is. If you don't know, fencing is just selling stolen goods on the black market, and then continue on that route. Switch states when things got too heavy in one state, go to another state, because none of these were being seen as like, oh, I think you may need to talk to Jackie. She seems like she's out of control. She's kind of crossing the line here. There was none of that. It felt more like everything's cool. Like, this isn't a big deal. It happens to all of us at some point. We get arrested, we do our time, or we pay to get out, and that's the end of it. So you have to do your fees and whatever it is, or you just don't go and then you're on the run. But in either case, it wasn't viewed as this problematic behavior. It was viewed as normal. And because I didn't feel judged, I felt accepted, and I felt like I never suspected that I had a problem, any of my friends' parents had any problem, or my friends had any problem. These were more just like headaches that we had to deal with when they came up. 42, like I said, parent to an 11-year-old son. Now let's switch to this perspective, and I can share why I view the cool parents. I don't view them as cool at all. I'm seeing things through a different lens. Bella, do you want to come over here? You hear her little claws. Here, Bella. Want to say hi? Say hi. There you are. So the things my mom was saying, when my friend would come pick me up, things like, or when I would come home, things like, what you listen to matters, and garbage in, garbage out. You're feeding your mind garbage, and you're not going to amount to anything. You're never going to amount to anything doing what you're doing. What I've come to understand is what she was saying was coming across as very angry. That was her passion. That was her love. She had a tough sort of exterior, and she didn't mince her words. And I appreciate when people don't mince their words. But when I was young, I was really sensitive, and I took everything so personal. and it felt like a personal attack. It didn't feel like she wanted to help me. It just felt like she wanted to judge me, and everything I did was wrong, and everything she did was right and perfect. So that rubbed me the wrong way as a young adult. I'm gonna wait till she stops drinking her water. I appreciate that my mom and my dad, they demonstrated a strong faith. Growing up, I appreciate that now. I appreciate that my mom was trying to guide me in the right direction, and I appreciate the fact that she didn't shy away from telling me how she felt when she knew I was doing something wrong or hurtful to myself, or that was going to impact my life. It was going to be a negative thing for me as I continued down that road, because again, they saw the arrest, and they saw the arrest in a different light. They saw the arrest as like warning signs of, this is getting worse, this is getting worse, this is getting worse, and they would encourage me to go into rehab. It was usually the courts that were sort of pushing me in there. If you want to get rid of this violation and get off probation, you need to go into rehab for 30 days and then complete your, they called it unsupervised probation. And my parents didn't think of these as light things. Like my friend's parents, they viewed these as bad things that needed to be corrected. They needed to steer me away from this. They couldn't. I didn't have that kind of desire. I was rebellious to my core. I saw it as I just saw it as a challenge. That was back to that thinking of, I'll be somebody. I'm just going to be who I want to be. Fuck who you want me to be. Now, me coming from the perspective of being a parent, I am sort of somewhere in between. I'm a far cry from the cool parent, and I don't have the desire to be the cool parent based on my definition or experience with the cool parents. But I'm definitely not a super strict religious parent either that sort of has so many rules to the point where you feel trapped or like you can't express yourself fully. You can't open up about things. There's no space. Like for me growing up, there was no space to talk to my mom. She was going to talk down to me, and if I didn't agree, that was going to turn into a fight. But there wasn't an open line of communication. So that's something that I took things from both sets of parents that I liked, and I implement those as I learn how to be a better parent along the way. And in the beginning, I was kind of like the fucked up parent because I wanted to be myself. I didn't want to change or lose my identity. And I think that's how people get sucked into being the cool parent, is because you're like, oh, I'm going to be cool. Like, I'm not going to be one of those moms, or I'm not going to be that dorky person driving the minivan and wearing a dad visor and whatever, like whatever you picture the uncool parents as. I'm not going to be that, right? I'm still going to be me, and I like who I am. So I don't need to change my whole identity to be a parent. And so as a young parent, I was struggling to stay off drugs, and it took me a while just to be able to quit alcohol. But I had some red flags, and we're not going to get into that here because I've already gotten into that in other videos. But those red flags and very scary experiences with alcohol and then relapsing were enough to get me to finally clean up completely. And then I've sort of found my own parenting style as I've gone. But in the beginning, I just remember it was suffocating because we had my husband's set of parents and my set of parents sort of, and then all these strangers that you run into in the world sort of giving their unsolicited advice on what you should do. And if you don't do it like this, you're doing it wrong. And then you feel like you're a bad parent. It's like, forget about being the cool parent. I don't want to be messing my son up. I don't want to be a bad parent. So it took me a long time, probably several years before I started to gain confidence and like, yeah, I can keep him alive. I can do this. Like, I'm not going to mess him up. I'm not going to be a danger to him. This is going to be a safe place. I'm going to create a safe environment for him. I'm going to find a way to be stable emotionally and not toxic. So it was a long process to unlearn all of those things that came so natural, taking the easy route, doing the wrong thing for the right reasons, or then even doing the right thing but for the wrong reasons. A good example of this is when I became pregnant. So when I was pregnant the first time, it wasn't with Nick, it was with somebody else, somebody that I'm not fond of. Kind of like, he was my boyfriend, but it was like a fling of a relationship, meaning I wasn't over my last boyfriend when I got with him. I just got with him to sort of take my mind off of the guy that I had my heart broken by. So when I got pregnant and I was with him, my mom was condemning me because she didn't find out what I'd done until after the fact. I had an abortion, and she would very strongly was against that. That's against the Catholic faith. You've committed a cardinal sin. You're going to hell. You're going straight to hell. That is an unforgivable sin. And I felt the weight of the abortion even as a fucked up young person. I was in my mid-20s at the time, but instead of, like, I didn't really know how to deal with that. I just knew after I did it, it felt so wrong on so many different levels. But I did that, and I had to live with that, and I didn't keep it a secret. I did tell my mom about it, but then I kind of strongly regretted telling her because it didn't make things better. So then I went heavier into the drugs and all that, and it wasn't until I was in my very late 20s, I believe 28 years old, when I became pregnant with my son, Nico. And at this time, it was with Nick, who's always been in my life since I was 18 years old. So we've just stayed connected even when we were dating. Then when we would take a break from dating, we would still keep in contact and still remain friends. Then we would date again and so on. So when we when we last hooked up, I was actually trying to be sober, and I was in a homeless shelter, and I left, hooked up with him, then came back. Long story short, and then let's actually not get into that. I was in shock for a really long time, and I was in outpatient rehab, and I just remember kind of sitting in there like, damn, like everybody's got the good things going for them, and here I am. I've done the one thing that I can't get out of, and I don't want to be a parent at all. I don't want to be married, and my mom was pressuring me to. She let me move back in with her at this point in my life because the homeless shelters were just really, there was too much temptation in the homeless shelter, too much drugs and alcohol, to where I was just not gaining my footing in sobriety. And I appreciate that they let me back in at that age. But my mom was taking that opportunity where she was with me all the time to sort of pound into my head, you need to do the right thing. You need to get married. You need to get married in the Catholic Church. And I did that. And I actually kind of twisted my husband's arm into marrying me because I basically gave him an ultimatum, like, either we get married or I'm going to find somebody else. And I want to get married because I want to provide stability for Nico. And that was true, but I didn't need to get married. I probably didn't need to get married to do that. Also, part of me was like, I've never done anything but hurt my mom for the longest time now. And if I get married in the Catholic Church, that's going to make her feel happy and proud, maybe even. And I can do this for her, right? I can do this. And so we got married in the Catholic Church, and I don't regret getting married, but I do think I did the right thing for the wrong reasons. So another thing that I took away from being raised in a really strict religious house was that I didn't want to use religion or my belief in God as a divider. So I didn't want to use that to stand on this side and point at you for being wrong because I believe you're wrong. That's something I didn't always agree with my mom's tactics. I now appreciate that she stands up for what she believes, but I don't often agree with the tactics that are used to do it, at least not in the early days. She has come a long way since then, but like I said, she doesn't mince her words, and that can be a beautiful thing, but it can also sting really bad when it's something that you internalize. And as a young adult, I internalized all of those things, and my own inner voice became harsh, judgmental. I would condemn myself and pick apart every single flaw. That became my inner dialogue. I didn't know what it felt like to have a loving, encouraging voice, external or internal. I didn't know that, and so I want to be that for my son, and I want to be that for myself, and that's something I still work on to this day, is making sure that I'm giving myself grace and I'm talking to myself how I would talk to somebody I love, how I would talk to my husband, how I would talk to my son, how I would talk to a good friend. Talk like that to myself too. Don't be so nasty with myself and so harsh and mean and hateful towards myself, because it's not going to do anything for me. The things I thought were love were the things I was being praised and appreciated for, which was picking up large amounts of drugs and delivering them on behalf of my friends' parents. And I know now that's not love. That's actually demonstrating a lack of concern, a lack of care for our future and our overall well-being. And I know now they were seeing things through their own lens and their own filter. And so their filter and lens could have been so muddled up through all their experience in life that they are not able to see clearly what they're asking us to do. But by asking us to get ounce after ounce, pound after pound, what they're asking us to do was risk our future, risk going to prison for many years just so that they could get more fucked up, so that we could get more fucked up. So it was coming from a place of their own desire. Their selfish desire was overriding their concern and their love for us. And I'm not saying they didn't love their kids. What I'm saying is this was not a demonstration of their love. And it's not like it was just, oh, it's just my kid's friend. Like, you're asking your child to do that too. And I don't want to ask my child to do something that's going to put him and his future in jeopardy or him in danger. So I view that a lot more serious than I viewed it back then. And I'm not going to, it's so weird because I've never really had to work with the police, like cooperate with the police on anything. So I'm imagining a time if my son committed a crime and the police came knocking on the door, like what would that look like? But I have to hope that I wouldn't lie on his behalf, because by doing so, I'm teaching him that I'm okay with what he's doing, and I'm not. So I would have to navigate that hopefully through honesty and wanting to help my son, but knowing that sometimes him going in is the best thing for him, because when I was in jail, oftentimes I would gain clarity and I would become like the more true version of myself. When I'm using drugs and alcohol, the longer I use, I become the complete inverse of my true self. So anytime I was court ordered to rehab or sent to jail, I had time to think, I had time to feel, I had time to gain clarity, and those are the times when little seeds were planted of like recovery. And then I knew after a certain amount of time, this is something I can pursue. And now this is something that I feel I need to do, that I want to do for my son first, and then it became for myself and for my loved ones. Looking back and thinking of all the times where we were out of sight, out of mind, as far as my friends' parents, we were getting into riskier substances. I was anyway, drinking myself into alcohol poisonings and driving under the influence just like on a regular daily basis. And the amount of times that they came knocking at the door was probably zero, 0 to 1. So I don't see that as cool. I see that now as them putting their own wants and desires ahead of a concern for our best interest. And that sort of ties in with the very last but not least thing that I want to say, and that is that I try my absolute best to demonstrate a belief in God and having a relationship with God and sharing what I can about that, so that my son also wants to have or feels encouraged to have a relationship with God and starts to experience the benefits of having a relationship with God, because that was one of the key things that shifted my mindset from me, everything all revolving around me, to a bigger purpose, to the bigger picture, my higher purpose, and putting God above all of my worldly desires and obsessions, and going to God with my problems, not feeling I have to carry everything. And so forgiveness is huge. I would never tell my son that he's unforgivable. Even if he killed somebody, I wouldn't say he's unforgivable. I would let him know God forgives, and you can be forgiven. If your heart is truly sorry for what you've done, reach out for forgiveness, because every human is flawed. We all fall. We're fallible. That's why we have God to forgive us. It's not the same as like when I was younger and I was taking the Catholic confession booth to a whole nother level. Like, oh yeah, I can rack up all these sins and then just go into the confession booth 3 years later and poof, gone, wiped clean, rinse and repeat. That's different because I had bad intentions going into it. But I'm saying if you do something and then you are genuinely sorry for that, that is forgivable. One of the main ways I try to show him a belief in God is by striving to be Christ-like in my actions. And so leading with love, not leading from a place of like, I know more than you, I feel like you're acting stupid or you're being immature. It's just like sitting and listening with an open heart and feeling how they feel and seeking understanding, to keep an open mind and not shut off. Like he could say something and it's very easy to stop listening and just start planning what I'm going to say next. But I make myself, to the best of my ability, listen to everything, listen, take it in, think, and then sort of demonstrate through love and through thinking, how would Christ behave in a situation? And that's sort of what I'm striving to do. But because we are all flawed and imperfect, then to reinforce that, like when you do something wrong, don't think it's the end of the world. Don't grow up and think like you're so important and you're so powerful and your ego gets so big that you're above God and you don't need God and you know everything, because that's a dangerous place to be. And I have lots of stories that will demonstrate that. But to seek God when you're feeling weak, that's when he can strengthen you. To reach out to God when you feel happy, you can reach out and thank him for everything. To not close those doors just because everything's going good, or to close those doors because something tragic has happened and your heart becomes hardened. To keep God first, to keep that relationship with God consistent throughout your life is so impactful and so beneficial. And so that's what I try to teach. And I try to teach mostly through doing and sharing my own experience. But I did go through a period where I was like a yeller parent, and I've had to work on that. And there's so many other things that I do wrong and too many to list. And by having this open communication with my son, I've experienced many benefits from it as well. I mean, I've learned a lot from his experiences and from his perspective. So it goes really both ways. It's not to always have this teachable moment. Sometimes it's more about getting to know how the other person sees things, and so then we can open up our mind to see things through their perspective. One thing my son appreciates is that I will go tell him I'm sorry when I know I've messed up, like after I've yelled or something. I'll go back and I'll apologize, because that's not something I got growing up, and that's not something I experienced growing up, but I think it's really important to do that, because it's showing that, like, I don't exactly know what I'm doing, and I do share that too. I hope that doesn't scare him. It's like, I don't know what I'm doing, but all I know is, and he appreciates this about me, is that every day I'm trying to do better than I was before. I'm trying to improve, and I'm trying to fulfill my higher purpose here on earth. So that's where I'm at. So I don't want to be the cool parent, and I don't want to hang out with the cool parent anymore, but what are your thoughts? Have you had experience with that? I mean, I love to hear your stories, and I haven't been on here for like a month, so leave me any comments or questions, and yeah. By the way, if you saw this, it's from getting my first endoscopy, but I don't have results yet, so there's nothing really to talk about. But that's where they put the needle in me, so it bruised up pretty bad. If you were wondering, still clean.